A very good morning to all of you. So today we are in day 5 of the lecture series or the course as we call it. Time flies, they say, and we are already midway. Today happens to be a Friday. Your enthusiastic participation is worth the effort that has been put in by the entire team, the Gyan team, our staff here in the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies, yes, my colleagues, and most importantly, the resource person, Professor Shawal. Thank you so much. Today's lecture is on Is the New Asia a military or an economic construction or both? So question has been posed, is the New Asia, within quotes, a military or an economic construction or both? And the topic for the tutorial is the meanings of security and stability, yes, Montesquieu's temptation. Tomorrow and day after, that is Saturday and Sunday, it's the weekend. So you have off days, time to rest a bit, and most importantly, to work on your assignment. The hard copies of your essay, we hope to receive by Tuesday. Rather, we will receive by Tuesday. And those of you who have not received the study material which we sent yesterday and even today, that's because perhaps we don't have your email IDs. Please make it a point to give it to one of the volunteers by, say, after the tea break, or rather before, during the tea break. Okay? Please, it's important that each one of you receive the study material that we are sharing with you on a daily basis. So once again, a warm welcome to you, Professor Shawal, and over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your excessively kind words. And today is indeed the last day of the first week, so you can have a good rest from tonight or this afternoon and forget all about me and the stringent dynamism of these 2 weeks. So we are picking up a topic which was indirectly touched upon yesterday, which is the military aspects of any regional construction, whether the military aspect is the dominant one for a military organization or the indirect offspring of a security nature of any regional organization. Is the New Asia a military or economic construction? The question basically is that of the nature of the organization, and the nature is the substance or the essence, without going into essentialist analysis, yet alone into a universalist analysis. We have noticed yesterday, and we noticed again today, that these questions of the nature of an organization, or for that matter of any form of cooperation, is a recurrent question. What I used as a phrase yesterday, and which will be part of the first paragraph, is that which is regional is not military. Of course, it's an exaggerated statement, but it's a stimulating one. We'll go in paragraph 2 through some detail. It's impossible to go through all details, but some details of the already held military exercises, noticing the dates of the first ones, 2002, 2003, very, very early on. We'll then call this a situation an ambiguous or an ambiguity in paragraph 3, and pick up in paragraph 4, which will then lead after the tea break to the tutorial, the temptation of over security, or the temptation of the power temptation, which Montesquieu suggested to call it. And I quote Montesquieu not because he is French, but because it's a reference in political philosophy. Before I start the paragraph, let me attempt a few maybe clumsy words of introduction. The title justified in my mind because 15 years ago I was invited to a seminar in Almaty, and I suggested to talk about the SEO. And I noticed that the program officially sort of focused on the economic form of cooperation provided for by the SEO. And I realized that to call the main essence of the SEO an economic cooperation was already an interpretation of the founding charter or the founding Shanghai Group activities. The origin, the original substance matter is border negotiations. And in fact, many of your questions I should have answered by pointing to that origin and stopping there. It is border negotiation which started the whole dynamic in the early 90s, formalized in the late 90s, and picked up again, of course, in the operations of the SCO after 2001. So if we call it economic cooperation with, in the background, at that time already, 2006 was the moment I went to Astana for this seminar, 3 years into military exercises, we are contemplating a shifting or evolving or enriching substance or nature of the organization. So the question of the nature of the organization is one that we must address, leaving aside the legalistic question of the legal capacity of the organization. Point one. Point two, that led me to using a reference from a classic geopolitical authors, and one in particular, Yves Lacoste, who is the man who actually renewed geopolitical analysis in France. And he makes this distinction between, well, his first claim is that geopolitical analysis is one that should uncover and clarify intentions, the intentions of actors, the intentions of states, the intentions of other actors. What are intentions? And then he makes a further distinction between real intentions and admitted intentions. The second one being, of course, easier to uncover. The admitted intentions are part of the ways in which actors justify their actions, speeches, declarations, public statements. These are the admitted intentions. But the real intentions, of course, are more difficult to uncover because they are part of the secret strategy of many actors. And yet, if we are able to uncover the real intentions of actors, we are making a great step into the understanding of the dynamic at play. So you've guessed me coming already. Is the real intention of the SCO to become more and more a, strictly speaking, defense organization or security organization in the narrow sense? Or is this only one aspect of its activities and the main substance is economic cooperation? I have the answer in my mind to some extent, but not the full answer to that question. So what is the real intentions of the SCO creators and the SCO activators is the substance matter of this chapter. And my tentative answer in the end of the introduction, which must be picked up in the conclusion, is the following one. I think in reality we are looking at an organization or a spirit or a process beyond the strictly speaking organization, which consists of two aspects. And the Shanghai processes both aspects at the same time. There is indeed a more and more prominent economic program that is suggested and adopted and followed. There is clearly an economic perspective, an economic intention in this Shanghai cooperation, but there is also a military aspect as well, and I will say later on in the chapter that one is the precondition of the other to some extent. Military security or military cooperation can foster security, and security is the precondition for economic cooperation. There cannot be economic cooperation or prosperity in disorder or in a state of instability and so on. So one is the means to the other, and to use the famous phrase, tentatively for now, we could suggest that the military aspect is the means to the economic end of the Shanghai construction. So I go now to the 4 paragraphs, starting with the first one, and my statement of what is regional is not military, which is of course an exaggeration. It suggests that vice versa, what is military is not regional, and I covered already the idea that NATO is an example of what I have in mind by this statement. It is a military organization, not a regional one. It's neither North American nor West European, but it's both. It's Atlantic. In fact, the word Atlantic means that. The CSTO is regional and military, so it's a counterexample, so it seems, but are not members of the CSTO, important actors of Asia, the New Asia, China in particular, and the other new members of the organization. And the SCO is regional, definitely. But is it also military or not? So I seem to be playing on words, but I am in the sense of teaching is playing on words, but I'm not in the sense that if we should agree or disagree on the nature of the organization and substantiate our agreement or disagreement, we'll make a great step forward to the understanding of what the organization or the process is. Next, I come to my trio of words, which I think is very simple but very useful, of neighbors, allies, and partners. And I think with these three words we can characterize a lot of the post-war, post-Second World War, and post-Cold War dynamics. Neighbors are becoming partners. That is the fundamental evolution of the post-Second World War, post-Cold War contexts. Whether they are becoming partners in the classic sense of defensively forming a capacity to fence off any centripetal attempts, or whether they are becoming partners in a very open-minded manner, joining the world macroeconomic indicators race, is, I think, more what is happening. So the next point is to spend a little time on reflecting upon the security, the classic security aspects and the military aspects, and in that sense on the military exercises of actors organized on a regular basis. My contention here is to ask the question, are military exercises a military thing? Or are they also, perhaps more to the point, something else? And I would argue that the military exercises make sense way beyond the technical military aspects of what they are. They are, of course, exercises a moment or an occasion to test the operational capacity of the headquarters and the soldiers and the commanders and the weapons. And they are, of course, very much so a real-time, real-world moment when all aspects of warmongering or all aspects of moving troops on the ground are tested. Even something as simple as the adequation of what do you call them, ammunitions and weapons. There was a famous moment in the case of NATO when they changed the rifles used by soldiers, but they forgot to change the ammunitions. So when they went on the ground to test the weapons, they found themselves unable to shoot. So something as simple as that, of course, communication by radio and other forms of communication. Even the plurilinguistic aspect of joint exercises grouping soldiers from different countries should be tested. I'm not quite sure how they do this. I suppose the commanders speak many languages, and the soldiers are grouped together by linguistic groups. I don't know, but so there is definitely a military aspect which consists of testing the weapons, more or less. But there is much more, I think, which refers to the timing of the exercises, the scale of the exercises, and the style of the exercises, if I may use a few minutes to detail this trio of terms. The timing of the exercises usually echoes international tensions or diplomatic negotiations or some aspect of the cyclical nature of international politics. When diplomatic tensions are high or when there is a negotiation looming up on the horizon, often the exercises are organized to put some pressure or to demonstrate some forcefulness or willingness to negotiate or not to negotiate so easily with the other camp or the other bloc. Similarly, and the example I will use in a moment is the one looking at the exercises on the one hand bringing together Japan, South Korea, and the USA, and on the other hand North Korea, Russia, and China, or the USSR at the time. So these two groups of countries. But beyond the timing, there is the what did I say? The scale or the size of the exercises, consisting of looking at how many troops, how many vessels, how many airplanes, what sort of weapons are being tested or used or moved on the ground, or for that matter, in my example, at sea. And this also is an indicator of whether the exercise is a routine one, not a stake in itself, or whether it is a physical, so to speak, demonstration of the intimidation, perhaps, if I can use the term, of one group, of one bloc, displayed vis-à-vis the other group or countries or bloc. And then the nature of the forcefulness of the exercises comes into play as my third looking glass. In the example that I use, how close do the vessel borders to the borders of the other camp, or how far out do they remain? How threatening or pressing the troops behave vis-à-vis the other bloc? All this is relevant. All this is relevant. And so we come to the idea, which is the one I present to you, that military exercises are in fact an accompaniment, or they are a background to international political or diplomatic negotiations. So in my example, every time there was, during the Cold War, a peak of tension between East and West, you'd see the maneuvers, the exercises organized by the South Koreans, Japanese, and Americans be larger in scale, more frequent, and bringing the forces nearer the international waters of the other countries, and vice versa. It was almost a, not automatic, but almost a very visible correspondence between tensions and exercises. And the same can be noticed in every part of the world where allies, military allies, conduct exercises regularly in order to echo or press or somehow intervene and perhaps to some extent jeopardize diplomatic negotiations or diplomatic meetings and encounters. This is so true that you have examples also of small countries with a very modest military capacity organizing military exercises regularly, and one may wonder why. You have the example of Malaysia and Brunei, for example, not gigantic military forces on the world scale, organizing military exercises together. And I'm sure, although I'm not an expert on that, you have the equivalent in some of the American or Latin American spaces, and in Africa and so on. So I really suggested to you that to study military exercises, we need some military details. But to understand military exercises, we need some historical, diplomatic, and political material. So when we will come to the Central Asian or New Central Asian or Shanghai space or the CSTO space, we can approach the issue, to conclude paragraph 1, with two things in mind. We should, of course, from the military, the technically military point of view, remember that we are looking at countries with vast armies and vast military capacities. We are looking at members which are nuclear powers, many of them. We again recalled ourselves yesterday that half of the 10 are nuclear powers, or 4.5, and 5 are not. And we're also looking at countries which spend a high percentage of the GNP on the military budget and military aspects of their policy, the modernization of their army, and so on and so forth. So it's very easy to be tempted to suggest that this is purely a military power demonstration. It's that the exercises are meant to flex muscles, or to show a capacity to be able to flex muscles, and to convince the rest of the world or the region that that the military capacity is absolutely huge. And this is only fair play. Obviously, any group of countries is supposed to be willing to convince itself and convince others that it is powerful. Perhaps there is something of a message emitted by the member states to the observers and dialogue partners, and so on and so forth. But my interpretation will be focusing more on the interpretation of the exercises. And we move now to paragraph 2, entitled But the SCO innovates in Pan-Asia or new Pan-Asia exercises. I use the word exercises, I hope. I did, yes, because the French word is different and sometimes we get it wrong. And so we are going to look at some tables, not immediately. I still can't get over the luck I have to have you with me. It's I will never leave this place. But let me insist on the title of the paragraph. But the word "but" is there, and the word "but" is there because, in many ways, as I've said in my introduction, the Shanghai construction is an economic one. Is a one with the aim of economic prosperity, shared prosperity, development, open borders, trade, investment, so on. But it also exists, and very much so, through military exercises, and it innovated in that sense. And innovate means two things. It means that there was, and I insist on this, a real invention beyond trust to sharing secret services information, to sharing military, not equipment, but use or potential use of equipment. And that is a lot of it's a huge step to take among new partners, and it innovated also. The second meaning of the word is very early on, and the dates we are going to be looking at just now are a testimony to that. The organization was created in June 2001. The charter was adopted in June 2002, and some military exercises started that very year, and then went on from 2003 and 4 and so on, year after year after year. And not only that, but in parallel to the SCO military exercises, started the same year, 2003, the CSTO military exercises. Now the membership is not the same, of course. The main difference is that China is part of one organization, not part of the other organization. But the fact that the two organizations picked up this military exercising activity is, I think, very revealing. Now this is the CSTO2. The CSTO1 is formed in the early 90s, as you know, and exists in its own right, but goes through, in the early 2000s, through a process of enlargement, welcoming more members, and also through a process of these military exercises. So there are a number of documents which can be used. What I'm going to do first is to quote documents that you might look at, which contain qualitative analysis of the question, and then we'll tentatively look at some tables, not in full details, but to give you an idea of the almost whirlwind, the effervescence of these military organizations. Now, two names come to mind as people who have written on the issue. One is Marcel de Haas, first name Marcel, de Haas, first name, a Flemish or Dutch name. There is a text published in 2007 called the Peace Mission 2007 Exercises. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization advances. Incidentally, we notice that they have named these exercises first peace missions, which sounds very nice. Who can be against peace? No one. And then the other name that was given, sometimes to joint exercises. Already joint exercises between the SCO and the CSTO, the name of anti-terror missions, or anti-terror exercises, the fight against terrorism becoming, after 2001, a dominant issue, being fueled into or merged with the military aspects of the anti-terrorist fight. There's more than a military way to fight against terrorism, but there is one too. So it is a document that I really encourage you to look at, which does contain an annex on a number of so-called military exercises, but which gives an interpretation of them. It's in English, therefore it's compulsory reading. The second document is 2016 by the same Marcel Dehaas, called War Games of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, subtitled Drills on the Move, to make it interesting. And war games, of course, is an expression which is not really useful to use. They're not war games, they're not games. They are real life military aspects of what I call the broader perspective, the affirmation of a space. Does the word affirmation make sense in English? To affirm oneself, or to assert oneself, or and so on. So already you have a number of details and interpretations in the document, which is a 2016 article. You have other documents which seem to be country-based. I'm sorry, but they are not. But they give an idea of the political dimension of these exercises beyond the military one. In 2012, the Eurasia Daily Monitor published a paper called China Leads SCO Peace Mission 2012 in Central Asia. And so what is interesting in this title for me is leads, China leads. It doesn't matter whether one country leads. If they are joint military exercises, that's what makes them relevant. Leads, it could be China or Russia or any other country, India or Kazakhstan, it could be any country, but leading is, of course, a journalist sort of term. Leads Peace Mission 2012 in Central Asia. And in Central Asia, if we mean by that the 5 or the 4 states or countries concerned, it means that Chinese troops have exercised in those territories, which is presumably for any neighbor army to send soldiers, even under the umbrella of a military exercise. It was a very delicate thing. And in 2014, an article by journalists, again, is called China Hosts SCO's Largest Ever Military Drills. China, again, hosts, meaning on its territory, SCO's largest ever military drills. And so what caught my attention is the words largest ever. Vouch for it being the largest ever. It might be a large one, it might be a larger one, but it could never be called the largest one, because there is a future in the sequence to come. But indeed, 7,000 troops were mobilized for that exercise, and 5 countries took part in the exercise, sending troops to China. And so in that sense, it is 2014, a moment when things are picking up. Now, of course, you know my liking for contextual analysis. Any date should be looked at together with other dates. 2014 echoes events in the Balkans, or echoes events in the Chinese New Silk Road initiatives, or echoes events preparing for the enlargement of the SCO. So you could argue, if you were, or if we were together looking for, small details and blow them up out of proportion, that this is a moment when the largest drill takes place before newcomers come into the SCO, India and Pakistan. So we could always look at things together. And sorry for suggesting this to you, because you are not undergraduates, but looking at basic information, although it is Wikipedia, the websites which you were sent, I think, on the SCO and on the CSTO, which is regularly updated and not poorly done. I think these are useful documents. Do touch, under the pretense of presenting the history of the two organizations, to touch upon the military exercises aspect and they have further readings available to you. So now, if we look at these documents, maybe let's look at them in the following manner. What's the time? Time is passing very quickly. So let's look at the one we can then keep for the last document, the more substantial one. The first one is this one. Can you find this one? Or maybe we'll start. No, we'll start with this one. Maybe because time is going to be short. In the 2016 article by Marcel de Haas, you have two sorts of tables. So this is this one. Yes. It's on the board even before I suggested. On page 382, are we on page 382? Yes, we are. We have the SCO military exercises from 2002 all the way to 2015. So we'll need a document for the following period afterwards. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all details of the table, but just to bring to your attention through the dates indicate to you not just the year and the frequency, but the duration of the exercises, usually a few days, not more, or a week at most. I don't think they ever reached 10 days, but 1 week is a long. Then you have the participants, and you notice that often it's only 2 or 3 participants, at least 2 if it's a joint exercise, but very rarely all of them. Countries tend to exercise together. On page 383 from 2006, you have all 5 countries there, 6 countries, and you have basically, this is my point, more than one exercise in the year. 1 in 2002 and 3 and 5, but 3 in 2006, 2 in 2007, and so on and so forth. So this is really something that should be noticed. Next, you could look at the location of the exercise, where they take place, how far they take place from the joint borders, always a little further from Uzbekistan, sometimes close to the common Chinese, Russian, Chinese, Kazakh, Chinese, Kyrgyz-Tajik borders. But sometimes they take place very far, in Vladivostok, which is far for everyone, or in the Xinjiang region, which is more of a border area. And also they have a name, and the name is interesting because sometimes it is either peace mission or anti-terror mission, as I said. Sometimes there is something else, mobilizing geography, the Tian Shan exercise, for example, in 2006, or some other location within the region. And so we are looking at exercises which become systematic, which becomes full scale, and which become more and more frequent, although of course the number doesn't exceed often 2 or 3 in 1 year. Briefly from page 393, if we can go to page 393, we have the CSTO equivalent to these exercises. And clearly, they begin more or less 10 years after the first creation of the CSTO, but exactly the same year by taking or give a few months as the SCO exercises. And the rest of the commentary is the same: the dates, the duration, the location, the participants, and the details. You have details, and the one indicator to be looked at is the number of troops, not the only indicator that makes sense, but it gives an idea of the logistics involved. It is complicated to move troops. It is more complicated to command multilingual troops than to use such or such type of weapons. If you are a military expert of military weapons, you can actually have the details of which weapons were used. So this is really, you have pages and pages on in this article covering the period 2003-2015. Now, there is some more recent data, which I suppose we should pick up from the Nisharapova text, which I have. I think the tables were sent to you. But only the tables, because this is an ongoing article which is not yet published. And sometimes students disregard the mention, do not quote, work in progress and so on. Not mine, but my colleague from Bishkek. And so she does give some details regarding the years 2017, 17, all the way to 24, 23, 22, 21. So this is really something that has not slacked in the period 2003-2025 today. So for over 20 years, 2 or 3 times a year, 5 or 6 or more countries mobilize thousands of troops and conduct military exercises. It is relevant. And someone in the room asked me 2 days ago, I think, that as we say in French, it's not tomorrow, that the troops of India or Pakistan will cross borders. And I should have answered 2 days ago, and I didn't. I should have answered that if it is part of the multilateral treaty arrangements, it will happen. When, how exactly, and so on, but it will happen. Otherwise, the provisions of the treaty make no sense. And before we reach the state when the state is criticized by the other states for not going along the provisions of the treaty, there is time to pass. And I should also have answered, and I will do it today before I forget, that any organization contains provisions which some members are not happy to comply with. Many European Union members are very unhappy about the tax provisions, trade arrangements, or and something as obvious as the free movement of people, which is the basic principle of the European Union, is now opposed in the name of the border security, immigration control, and things like this. So, in fact, if I were to be provocative, I'd say that at least as many points are not happily received by member states as points that are happily received. This is my more awake answer to the question of 2 days ago. So there are a number of other documents which we will not use so much. But maybe this one, if you can find it on your, it's on the board before I ask for it, of course, yes, which gives, which is from the title of it. The title again looks at the two organizations together and the way in which they organize maneuvers. By the way, this is a student essay. I've crossed the name out, but this is a student essay, so I'm very comfortable with using bright students' work, and I'm not someone who thinks that the competence comes with the title only. So you have a table that looks at the CSTO exercises, and then from page 4 or 5, whatever, the SEO exercises from the years 2007 to 2021. The ranking is a bit strange. It's not in order of dates, but that doesn't matter. But it is a more simple table to look at, and you have the key information: which organization, the participants, the host country, the number of troops, and the scenario, meaning the rationale for which the exercise is organized. So if you go to the first top table, you see, for example, the rationale called the scenario is armed groups in mountains, armed group in Ural Mountains region, terrorist groups in Caucasus. So it is very operational purpose pursued by the exercise. And if you go to the other table, the next one for the SCO, to finish off this paragraph very quickly, you see that sometimes the host country is two countries. And that makes it, this is the case in 2007, Russia and China together, the case in 2003, Kazakhstan, China. So there are complex things to organize. If you look at the scale of the terrorists concerned, it's thousands of kilometers, at least several hundreds of kilometers, which are covered by the movement of troops. But back to the point that it's not easy for armies to cooperate when they haven't been used to. For the anecdote, of course, there was a moment when, as I said, without questioning the countries, one country said, we agreed to participate in the exercises, but soldiers from country A, we are country B, the exercise taking place in country C will not cross our territory. So soldiers from country A going to country C had to bypass country B, which was in the middle, and therefore hundreds of kilometers more were necessary for those troops to travel. So these things are part of the human and diplomatic nature, but we are looking at, again, a trend and a certain direction in which these organizations are going. And so when we call them security organization, we mean something which is a proper term, but they are both aiming at economic security and at classic security. But paragraph 3 and paragraph 4 now should be covered on time. So there is an ambiguity. There is an ambiguity in what security means. in what the nature of security is, and indeed what a security organization is. My introduction to paragraph 3 is a question. Is this ambiguity haphazard, or is this ambiguity purposeful? Is it an ambiguity which is nurtured and injected into the process to open up for different forms of interpretations? And I think this is what I have in mind. It is not ambiguity because diplomats or state leaders or the drafters of the treaty are not competent. It's an ambiguity because, first of all, they don't want to commit to something too specific, and they also want to leave the door open for evolution. And to solve this ambiguity in a very immodest claim, I would say that, as I said in my introduction, there is an aim and there is a means used to that aim. The aim is definitely economic performance, economic security, and economic credibility, macroeconomic performance, whether GNP or others, industrial production, and so on. And the aim is obviously economic cooperation and economic security. But economic performance or security requires stability and requires hard or strict or classic security. So the aim needs a means to be reached, and the means is the military capacity to ensure stability and to ensure a security. And in the expression military capacity to ensure stability and security, the word to ensure is the key one. In order to ensure security or to ensure stability, one must be stronger or more something, more capable than the actors who may threaten the security and stability. If you wish to ensure security in this room, you need to be stronger than anyone who might jeopardize the security. It's a very simple thing to say. So the ambiguity, as far as I see it, is not an ambiguity to do with the military dimension of the topic. The SCO has military credibility and wants to have it logically. The ambiguity is as to the degree of militarism. Or by militarism, I don't know if the word is clear in English, but militarism means the tendency to overdo, the tendency to over-focus on the military in order to contend with hardcore or strict security. And the degree of militarism is something that will be picked up in paragraph 4 because it echoes something to do with what to call it, excessive defensiveness. And excessive defensiveness is something almost like a cousin to potential aggressivity, Montesquieu's temptation, and so on and so forth. And so this is where we are situated in the discussion between military and militarism, whether military is a technical aspect or whether it is an aspect of ideas, ideologies, or what's the word, an overstretched obsession for affirmation of self vis-à-vis others and to some extent against others. This is the versus or the targeted at aspect of the construction. The ambiguity, if there is one, is not in the official doctrine of the organizations, but in the real intentions pursued by perhaps some leaders or some groups. And this becomes something probably complex to study because ideas or programs or ideologies also change with governments. So they are not as fixed in the marble, as we say in French, as the Charter or the founding treaty. The ambiguity also lies with the determination to intervene, militarily speaking, in certain theaters, or to project a military capacity outside the territory of the member states. This is where the ambiguity is, if there is one, but I think to some extent there is always one. And I conclude paragraph 3 here. The link that exists between the military capacity and the use of that capacity within the space against certain groups or outside the common space vis-à-vis third parties. And this is where we should pay much attention to a difference between the CSTO and the SCO. The CSTO has a section in its treaty, I believe it's section 5, that says, as I said yesterday, that an attack against one will be considered as an attack against all, which means that there is a commitment of members. And the CSTO has, how many members exactly as we speak? I think 7 Can someone check, please? Check. Which is the same article as in NATO, Article 4, that an attack against one. So the issue of whether an attack or destabilization or a border problem is emanating from within or comes from outside becomes a key issue. We mentioned this for the 2022 intervention in Kazakhstan by the CSTO, and this is the issue. So far, in the recent years and decades, the aforementioned organizations have strived not to present the crisis as emanating from outside or involving a third, in being caused by an actor or a state situated outside the space, because there is a risk of escalation immediately by all members intervening militarily speaking against that state. So this is something which could escalate very quickly into a full-scale war. So this is paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 now is the issue. Sorry. What is the actual figure of the members of the? Yes, please. Six. So let's name them. So we are. Oops. So we're up to date with in alphabetical orders, but this is incidentally to students. I suggest that if you work on these topics and when you list countries, the best way to list countries is by date of accession to the status in question, and within that you have by alphabetical order, and then the other countries, because the alphabetical order is very misleading. So if I go. Anyway, what I have: Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, former member states, Uzbekistan, Georgia, Azerbaijan. So looking at the members and the former members already gives an idea of the dynamic of the country. So where was I? Yes, the next paragraph, looking more provocatively at the title, "The Tempting Challenge of an Exclusive or Defiant Organization." I call this the Montesquieu's temptation. What is my approach here? Very quickly, and why do I quote Montesquieu? Because Montesquieu said anyone equipped with power would be tempted to abuse that power. You know the phrase well if you've studied political thought, political philosophy, and it is a statement which everyone accepts and which contains the consequences. Any man, says he, but any human, of course, in the modern terms, equipped or disposing of a power would be tempted to abuse it or exaggerate that power, which is why in constitutional thought the suggestion is to invent the separation of powers, each power checking the other power from becoming too excessive, that you know from your courses on constitutional law. But if we follow the train of thoughts, it means, I'm afraid I have to say, that any actor equipped with military power might be tempted to use it, or overuse it, or justify it, or demonstrate it. And perhaps the military exercises are a way to demonstrate without real use of the weapons, and they are a way of what's the English expression? Soupape de sécurité. What do you call the device that makes sure that when a machine goes into excessive pressure, some of the pressure is released in some well, when a safety valve. Thank you very much. So military exercises could be a sort of safety valve to let some temptations or pressures to flex muscles too much without engaging in real terrain or real life use of the weapons. This is part of the evolution of the past 70 or 80 years. It seems that if mankind was capable of some wisdom, the invention of the most destructive weapons ever, the nuclear weapons, was immediately accompanied by the non-use doctrine, the deterrence doctrine, the awareness that those weapons might make sense to deter someone, but not in being used. And the same, I think, is with the military capacity of an organization, whether the EU one day or the NATO today or the CSTO today or the SCO one day, would be to be able to deter, to prevent, to stop, to intimidate, to call a spade vis-à-vis competitors, but not to use the weapons that are available. Why? Because the present state of these issues are is basically one where the destructive capacity is already such that any use of the weapons would be a disastrous news, both for the user and for the attacked. And so my contention is that, and I conclude the paragraph 4 with this, before I conclude the chapter, is that there is a process in the making when the countries concerned are catching up on a military capacity, supposedly finding that when they first formed together in the early 2000s, they were lagging behind a joint or common military capacity that had to be built and demonstrated, and today it is more than demonstrated. But to have the awareness and wisdom that this capacity should be defensive, much more than offensive or aggressive. And why I'm optimistic on this issue is the fact that there are many other avenues or channels for a competition or even aggressivity vis-à-vis other parts of the world. There is the economic competition going on, the currency format of the competition we mentioned yesterday. There is, of course, the grey matter, as we call it in French, the smart power, or the intelligence, or the educational, or the industrial discoveries. There is a way in which the world power competition today takes the form of how many patents are lodged by one country, how many scientific or industrial patents, or Nobel Prizes. There is also, you can find tables of the hierarchy of world powers according to how many Nobel Prizes they have, even fine-tuned into the original passport of the Nobel Prize holder, or the university where he or she studied, or the place where he or she went on studying or teaching after the prize, and so on. So there are many other fora or media for international competition and even aggressive competition. That is the fate of mankind, to be aggressive, besides and beyond the military aspects. I'll stop here because I could then I could detail more recent situations or even declarations without saying who it was, who suggested that there was a case for using in 21st century means to bring to an end certain actors' ambitions using 19th century weapons. And it's a phrase that seems to me not only anachronic, but to suggest that the answer to the military instability should be military, I think is outdated. Why do I say this in my conclusion? Because beyond the first question I raised, between regional and military, what is regional is or not military, and so on, I see many ways in which the so-called continental competition between east of Asia and west of Eurasia has taken in many ways non-military forms. I think there is a case for suggesting that the Eurasian Economic Union is a competitive response to the success or development of the European Union, both economic organizations, commercial organizations, and very interestingly enough, the treaties of both organizations are very similar. in both the Eurasian Economic Union and the which was first called Eurasian Economic Community, as the Europe was called European Communities and then European Union. The treaties contain provisions for something which, whatever the name is an assembly, is a high court, is a central bank, and so on. So the institutions even are very similar. But there is, in geopolitical terms, an echo, a response, and this is my guiding thread in my profession, to look at regions or regional constructions in how they echo each other or respond to each other. This is much more relevant than to suggest that the SCO is as it was officially called by some of my Western colleagues, a NATO of the East, or that the SCO contains the potential for being a military competitor for NATO. Strangely enough, almost never do we come across articles that suggest that the CSTO is a sort of NATO of the East up against the NATO of the West, which is NATO, and so on and so forth. And even within the group of countries comprising China, Russia, and others, even within that group, there is a very subtle form of I will call it in my last chapter, rivalry between China and Russia, where one tries to progress where the other is successful. So the more the SCO is economically successful, the more Russia wanted to press and push for Eurasian Economic Union, and the more the CSTO seems to be a credible military dynamic without China, the more China perhaps pushes the SCO to become a military organization. This is how we make a more, I think, interesting analysis, not to agitate the flags of sort of fear and aggressivity, but to look in how organizations either among the same partners, more or less, or vis-à-vis other partners, create a systemic capacity to challenge the power of the other. My second and last point in my conclusion is this non-intervention aspect. The fact that organizations, however powerful and militarily equipped and destructively capable they can be, do not intervene with military capacities on the ground. So someone in the room is going to say, what about early January 2022 and the CSTO in Kazakhstan? So we'll come back to that in a moment. But even if you look at NATO, for example, when did NATO actually intervene? It intervened 3 times, but not as NATO only, under UN umbrella. That was the case in Bosnia, then Kosovo in the 90s, 92, 96 for Bosnia, or it was the end of 98 for Kosovo, and indeed in Afghanistan, directly, indirectly, calling the force what is the name in English? International Stabilization Force, ISAF. Besides those 3 occurrences, NATO is characterized by just what I say. It's characterized by capacity to modernize its armament, to enlarge its membership, to conduct exercises, to show a capacity, but not actually to intervene. The same with the CSTO. There were occasions we know where the CSTO could have intervened if the interventionist direction had been privileged. 2008, somehow in Georgia and around Ukraine, and we mentioned Uzbekistan 2005, we mentioned Kyrgyzstan 2010, and then of course the exemption that confirms the rule in 2022 in Kazakhstan. And so something which I almost never see picked up in the Western press, and I finish with this, it's 11:30, regarding Ukraine, the very extremely delicate aspect of the situation, which concerns something that could look like an attack on Russia. Anything looking like a state attacking Russia, not as Russia, but as a member of the CSTO, should lead to the joint intervention of the member states of the CSTO against that state. And so I'm not quite sure that, what I notice is that however there are unavoidably military actions that crosses the border one way or the other, that obviously takes place, even as the border itself is disputed. No one really is raising the hypothesis of a CSTO intervention in that sense. And so my last point is to say that as sad as my words may sound, the way to know the real nature of an organization, the way to assess the real nature of a process, is when the process is put to the test. There is always a moment when an organization or multilateral construction is put to a test. Not always, not only a military test, let me suggest you rest assured, but some test. So to mention what I know less badly, which is the European construction, we had a number of tests for the solidity of the construction of the European communities and Union. We had the 1966 empty chair crisis and the Luxembourg agreements, which the crisis of one country leaving the table, France in particular, was solved by a merger of the institutions and a reactivation of the treaty. This is the 1966 agreement. We had a test of another nature to answer the question what to do, and the famous question what to do as a European community or union with the post-Cold War, and what to do was to deepen and intensify the cooperation, turning the treaty into the Maastricht Treaty, which is much more integrated than the other ones. What the test is for the SCO, you are more competent than me to say. What the test is for the CSTO, what the test is for any organization. This is a moment when we uncover more of the nature of an organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You are the best.
Sir, I don't have these documents.
Please, yes, because I said to you they were less relevant because they concern one country. Cooperation organization per se, and not more about more general issues or more specific country-based commentaries. And so my answer is in the form of a question: why was academic freedom invented? And it was because sometimes topics make sense even before the majority of listeners or students are made aware, or not just students, actually, colleagues too. And before I say more, I would like to suggest to you a provocative question. Could anyone today be claiming to be studying Europe without looking at the European Union in particular as a form of organization? And the answer is yes or no, depending on whether you think the context is relevant, in which case you need more than the EU to understand Europe, or whether you think the technicalities of the way in which the European Union actually operates, the detail, the treaty provisions and so on, or the core decisions are sufficient. Similarly, my approach to the new Central Asia or the new Asia, of which India is part, however much you like it or whether you think it logical or historically justified or not, is a study of the new Asia that mobilizes the knowledge of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization per se. And my guess is that some of the details we'll be looking at were not known of you. Am I correct to suggest that many of you had not before read the treaty or the charter or looked at certain provisions? And so this is why I'm doing it. It doesn't mean that I should not be respectful of my own commitment to start from a broad perspective, to narrow down yesterday, today, perhaps early next week on the Shanghai dimension, and then broaden the perspective again towards the end of next week's sessions. I remember 20 years ago, in fact, I had a hard time convincing my colleagues in my university, where we had a master's degree which still exists on trade with Asia, that Central Asia was part of Asia. And I remember a meeting where one of my colleagues said, no, we are looking at East Asia because Asia is East Asia, which at that time was perhaps more true in terms of trading capacities and GNPs and industrial productions and so on. So I said to him, let's take a map and draw a line that goes from Japan to France. So we did, and the line goes through Uzbekistan. Whereas to them, the only way to go beyond what Asia for a long time meant for Europeans was to include India and South Asia in the picture, which we should have done a long, long time ago, including Hindi as a language taught in my university. We have a system by which we taught up to 12 languages, 6 so-called Oriental languages and 6 European languages, but not Hindi. And that is a fact which is, in terms of teaching modernization, strange. There is also the cost issue for universities to create a new area of teaching. It costs money to hire teachers based on the number of students and so forth. But the Hindi language is also not, unless I'm wrong, taught on the Sciences Po Europe Asia campus, where I taught. And classically, the languages taught are Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, which I think, in my university at least, we teach Arabic, which is also a language to do with the Western Asia and so on and so forth. So if you have disagreements, grudges against the fact that we tend to focus on one organization, please say them. And let's have a discussion on the micro-macro approach to regions. Micro meaning to some extent the one organization, and macro meaning the broad context of the dynamic. I'm more than happy to do so, because if we do, then we'll engage in a constructive form of dialogue where I don't excessively focus on things which you might think I do. So the topic of the tutorial is, we've in fact covered it to a large extent by this temptation I'm referring to. I used the words ambiguity in my talk this morning, the word temptation, the word real intentions, the word ultimate motives, so to speak. And so the topic is in fact security. What we call security, and I'd like your questions to focus on this. Security is, I think, wrongly sometimes equated with military aspects, and I try to show or to suggest to you that security, in many ways, is a synonym much more of stability than of military. And security, stability, peacefulness, what the Shanghai terminology calls good neighborhood, good neighborhoodliness, I think is really what is relevant in understanding the present dynamics. And so incidentally, I should have said this before, when you read any forms of publications on the Shanghai Organization or on the New Asia and so on, there are a few words you should always pay attention to. The SEO is, and then what comes after the is. The SEO is a regional security organization, or sometimes it is a political military form of cooperation, or it is a China-created organization, in so on and so forth. And these words vary to the point when we have tens or dozens of chains of words claiming to characterize or even define what the organization is. So is to call it a security organization relevant, proper, and yes? Is it sufficient? I don't know. And so we should have a discussion on this. Now, I think we should have more sort of question-answer dynamic. But your questions focusing on this issue. One way of asking the question is, what other ways are there to ensure security or stability in the region? And the third question is, what are the challenges that might jeopardize security and stability in the region? In some ways, the Cold War format was a very stabilized one. The post-Cold War format is a very flexible, open, and not unstable necessarily, but uncertain context. So if we agree that the challenges to stability and security was in the early 90s a scenario of continuation of the past, then we agreed that the security and stabilization was produced by a total invention or rupture from the past by creating something new that had, back to my definition, can you put it on the whiteboard, my definition of the region, not hitherto existed in history. And these words, something or a format of population that has not hitherto existed in history, only three words, very simple words, are extremely ambitious words. But they are not untrue. A format of coexistence, of neighborhood that has not in the past ever existed in that situation. So your region, you know more than I do, but my claim is that to understand the relevance of the Organization of Shanghai, or the relevance of what I call the New Central Asia, or anyway, the new word, the word new, is to go back in history and say, has there at any time in history existed something that resembled good neighborhoodness, peaceful cross-border situations in this region? So that's and the answer is yes. So this definition, I like it very much, not because it's mine. Those are past ego problems, but because it contains a synthesis or a summary of considerations which make sense and which may be applied to any region in the world. So I should be showing this to experts of Latin America, Southeast Asia, West Africa, and so on, to see if they agree or disagree. But I think it is broad enough to encompass a number of differences, but specific enough in its terminology to be the basis for a discussion. So I'm departing from the words on the program. Montesquieu's temptation is, as I said, once someone has power or military power, the temptation to overuse it. I prefer to overuse it than to abuse it. That's one question. But let's go back to my more general question. Looking back in history, has there been a moment, or have there been moments when the present situation of how countries mentioned interacted was comparable? Now, of course, if we have in the room historians going back to hundreds of years or thousands of years, I'd be happy to have their views, back to the Persian Empire, back to the 4,000 or 5,000 years original civilizations. But even if we go more modestly to the past few centuries, have we had a similar situation? And I suppose we should go back 200 years. That's enough material. And the answer is, I think, no. Have there been relations between, for example, China and Russia in the past compared to what they are today? And the answer is probably no. How should you date back the relations India has with Russia? Should it go back 100 years, 50 years, or in the present state of intense forms of exchanges and sort of views? Certainly for Central Asia, which is the substance matter of the course, what is happening since the last 30 years is entirely new. Those actors as states existed in many ways until the colonization and Sovietization. Then they disappeared in the sense that I used the word, and then they reappeared. But as they reappeared as different entities. We mentioned the composition of the populations, which has been altered over the course of the 20th century, and they certainly reappeared as new actors with modern concepts of sovereignty, modern concepts of borders, modern concepts of industrial and economic and trading organizations, modern contexts of energy use. I mean, the energy resources that they have made little sense before the 20th century, because at that time, what those resources are, oil and gas and uranium, were not used for energy in the world anyway. Oil has made the Middle East prominent in the way it is because oil was rediscovered as the key resource for energy. So I'd like you to challenge me, or I'd like us to have a discussion as to the newness aspect. What is new and what is not new, what is not so new in the way those countries interact. My contention is to say not everything is new, but more is new than the continuation of the past.
Questions, please?
Yes.
Or comments?
Sir, thank you very much for this enlightening lecture. To be very honest, the first day when you were using this term New Asia or a kind of integration or some kind of form, I was not very convinced. But today, after seeing all your the facts, which actually the military exercises and the duality that you are talking about with the economic aspect and the military aspect. So I have started now convincing for the new idea of the new Asia or the new Central Asia. So this is the first
Comment.
I mean, not only comment, but my my acceptance that actually I have started convincing with your idea actually. Second thing is regarding history. I mean, if we can consider this Silk Route or the, I mean, the connectivity of, I mean, from the Indian side, the travel of religion, especially from Buddhism, travel through Silk Route, and then these interconnections actually, or these, I mean, we can found in the history, but that's a, I mean, it's an entirely different context. But here, the present, the present scenario which actually you are posing for us, that is actually is more relevant in that. So this is the only comment only.
Yes, I think the concept of new or newness can be two things. It can be perceived as extremely arrogant for anyone to pretend to say what is new and what is not new, especially outside one's region. But one's region, what does it mean, one's region? Does it mean the passport, the birth, or the area of expertise, or teaching or research? I'm not quite sure. But I accept at full value that I'm a distant alien West European French cousin. I'm not from Asia. I have spent a little time in Asia and thought about it in my life. But on the other use of the word new newness is to as you say in English, call a spade a spade. I think you call it in French, we say call a cat a cat. And put the word new, how striking it might be, as a synonym to the word I often use, which is the word rupture. Does it exist in English, rupture? Breaking away from or reinventing anew, and things like this. And there are, and I stick to the concept of historical rupture. That is to say, invention of something new or reorganizing ways of interacting which have not hitherto existed in history. And so what we could do is focus for a few minutes on the discussion as to a date, perhaps not just one specific year, but a moment when this newness is materialized. So this newness becomes tangible and relevant to the historical dynamics. So what is the date when, if there is something called the New Asia in the geopolitical context? Let me say something to make it quite clear once more, that when we are into geopolitical analysis, to me it means we're looking into the study of territorial and material factors. Space, borders, movements, resources, populations, demography, something as simple as population to space ratio, population to resources ratio, something very classic, should also be taken into context. So in terms of India, for example, when would you date the new India, if you accepted my concept of a newness? I have my ideas, but what are your ideas? Or for that matter, the new China or the new Russia or the new France and so on. I think there are moments when things change, either dramatically. There is a moment when a dramatic historical event takes place. It can be a war, it can be a collapse of a system, or it can be a decision to change the course of things. And from that moment on, there is a need to reinvent. And so what I am suggesting to you, but let me make it more clear, is that when this reinvention takes place, it takes place with neighbors and no longer by itself. For so long, states have been, well, slow to form as modern states, and then they became obsessed with things which today make no sense, called isolationism, or protectionism, or aggressivity, or imperialism, as the only forms at that time of existing for a royal or imperial power. And that has changed. I'm not saying I'm right once more, but I'm saying this is the trend I see, that when actors reinvent themselves, they reinvent themselves with neighbor or with neighbors. So what is the date for the New Asia to emerge? Supposing you accept the concept of New Asia, which you may from the start refuse, I'd be happy with that as well. Is it? No, let me have you suggest dates, not me. But once you are thinking now, if we focus as we should as political scientists on the 20th century or the end of it, for China definitely there are a few dates that make sense. 1978 is obviously one that makes absolute sense. The opening up of China, the full modernization, the opening up is particularly to international trade, which is by definition to some extent capitalist international trade for a regime which is, politically speaking, still undergoing a communist revolution. 2001, I think, is when China enters the WTO. Is this correct? Yes. So this is the moment when the concretization or the confirmation of its international trading status comes about. Or is it also for China the joining of the ASEM or the joining of the APEC or such moves but there is also a date which has gone to some extent unnoticed for China, which is 1997. What is 1997? That's the so-called Asian economic crisis and other things, but this in particular. And what is the characteristic of the crisis at that time? Some economies, starting with Thailand, then South Korea and Japan and to some extent Indonesia, went into crisis because of the economic factor. My colleague here is more prominently knowledgeable, where the demand or the offer exceeded the demand, the currencies collapsed, the fact that firms had borrowed vast amounts of money in foreign currencies caused them to be unable to reimburse, the national currency dropped to almost nothing, and so on and so forth. In that situation, the only thing that could keep those countries from total collapse is the capacity to maintain their exporting capacities. So if the currency of the country dropped, exports became cheaper for outside actors, and so they could maintain for some time a capacity to export, bring in revenue, and salvage themselves from total bankruptcy, and so on and so forth. But those countries, Thailand, South Korea, Japan, and Indonesia, were exporting products, some of them being the same products as China exported. Because by that time, China had become a more advanced and more developed economy. So if China had decided to also devaluate the currency, to decrease the price of exports, that would have been an extra direct competitive blow to the economies of Thailand, South Korea, Japan, and Indonesia, in particular Japan and South Korea. Now, in geohistorical terms, in geopolitical terms, would China like to win over the competition in that sense against Japan? In many, many ways, yes, but China did not devaluate. And this is remarkable, I think, to be noticed also because China was at that time under criticism by others that the Chinese currency was over-evaluated and therefore should have been devaluated to some extent in any case. Yes, you were going to say something, no?
No. The concept of currency war which happened otherwise.
Yes. The concept of?
Currency war.
The currency war, so, yes.
China did not do it that way.
So these are the facts. Now, my interpretation of that is that China privileged some aspect of solidarity with the neighbors over China's national selfish interest, which were to be one step ahead even more in the world competition for macroeconomic dominance. So privileging the regionality or the relations with neighbors over the national selfish interest, as the realists call it, is, I think, an element of regionalization of China. That's my reasoning. I don't know if it's clear, but this is so. 1997 is an important moment when China does this. In the context of, or was the context, in the context of 1995 and 6, three things happened. The resumption of French nuclear tests in the Pacific, the creation of ASEM, Asia-Europe Summit, the Shanghai 5, and indeed the ASEAN Plus. The ASEAN Plus Forum formed in 1997. So there are contextual elements which also come into the picture. So the new Asia, to me, is 1997. In addition to 1978, in addition to, of course, the other dates which people say. But I'm struck, for example, that sometimes people say that the new China is 1911, 1949, and 1991. But this is not. These dates are relevant, but other dates are also relevant as well. And we could also mention 2 dates that make sense for the Japan-China relations. So have you thought about the new India, or am I asking a question which is difficult because it touches upon the self? The new Russia, I don't know what we could suggest the new Russia is. Is it 1990, 1991, 2000? Yes, obviously it is, because events which happened on those dates. But the new Russia, I think, is, in terms of context, the moment in the 2000s when the cyclical curve of the oil prices changed, and certainly Russia, because of higher oil prices, again into the 2000s, gained more revenue to finance its.
2007 and 8.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So the revenue deficit, which did characterize Russia for some time after the Cold War, was remedied in that sense. So Russia was able to finance a number of policies in a better way. But the new Russia, to me, is connected to invention and reinvention of regional organizations. The way in which the CIS, which in many ways could be suggested to be a forum for managing the end of something, for managing the end of the Soviet period or the end of the federal system, turned into a capacity to create within or as offsprings of the CIS the Eurasian Economic Community, or that sort of project, and the Collective Security Treaty Organization already in the 90s. So that's the new Russia, inventing with neighbors some organizations, and the member states of those organizations are all not 100% of them, but some of the former 14 Soviet republics. So that is the new Russia. Plus the other dates that make sense to me are the dates connected to what we've been looking at, the creation of the SCO, the relaunch of the CSTO, and all the other dates which I have mentioned to you before, which some of you think are too narrowly focused on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But let me provoke you in saying that if I were teaching this course on the New Europe, never mentioning the enlargements, never mentioning the treaties, never mentioning some of the provisions of the treaty, you'd be telling me that I'm not teaching properly. If I focused on the European Council, on the European Free Trade Association, on the CSC or OSC, you'd be telling me that I'm mentioning things that are relevant but not sufficient. So the new China, the new Russia, the new India is coming up. The new Kazakhstan, the new Uzbekistan, and all the new Iran, or the new. So as far as I'm concerned, the new Iran, for example, is 2005, and then 2021, and in between a role which implicitly Iran has played as being a sort of re-Asianized actor that has felt more free, especially after the 2005 Assad declaration, more free to substantiate critical stances on the West. And the new Turkey, as far as I'm concerned, is 2012. So maybe many people would say that the new something has to do essentially with a change of government, a change of majority, a change of party, a change of... and so I would disagree in the relevant contemporary geopolitical games, which is the making of regions. So you're listening to me, which is very intimidating, but I'm asking you questions. When should we date the new India, the new Pakistan, the new Bhutan, the new, in terms of their regional diplomacy, regional relations? All those countries have come up with a capacity to innovate. The new Cambodia, in many ways, is when Cambodia becomes a dialogue partner in 2015. Yes. Let's just sort of, I get mixed up with all the dates, but so I'm not going to suggest answers to my question to you, because otherwise you'd come crushing on me. But if we Cambodia 2015 as dialogue partners, yes. So yes, over to you, as the phrase goes. On my question or any other point.
Sir, actually you just said the internal politics and internal changes and upheaval doesn't matter in the external sphere, like in terms of defining regional regional calculations. But sir, I feel that as you are talking about the newness of this new Asia, so I feel it won't be possible until because Central Asia and this region is so like the internal dynamics are so vast that it will be very difficult to actually envision a new Asia in that sense, because if we take probably it will be like one taking the herd together, like the China taking the entire states together. So the gulf between these states, because of their internal dynamics, is so vast that it won't be possible to think about or envision about a united body to think about.
So when you say internal dynamics, what do you mean? You mean party politics and elections and majorities, or do you mean national interests being predominant and sometimes incompatible with the neighbors?
Central Asia and this area is so, it's like up and down. It's not stable. Like for example, if we consider Europe, we can see a linear. We can't say it's a linear. Not linear. But Central Asia is such that at one point you are having a kind of a democratic state, and suddenly it's such a revolution, then it comes to authority. So it's like the bump and jumps are very rapid and very great internal politics and internal socio-cultural
right,
issues.
Yes. So it's a very interesting discussion that I think things always look more linear or simpler from the outside. So Europe might seem linear to you, but not to me. Neither in the past century nor in the recent decades. It's not linear in many ways. There is a film in France that was called "Life is not a long, peaceful river." So things might seem simpler here in Asia to me, maybe oversimple. That's one point of answer to you. The other answer is that we are looking at international diplomatic evolutions, and diplomacies are characterized by two things. They are very, very slow to be constructed and specified and implemented, and once they are launched, so to speak, they are very slow to move, because what is diplomacy? Diplomacy is the art of winning over power by oneself or with others. Once this aim is established and pursued, it doesn't change. So my contention is that the power pursuit of the new Central Asia or of the new Asia is now on course, and that course is multilateral cooperation with a degree of shared plans of actions, with a degree of shared military capacities and so on, and that will not change. It will not change unless a major upheaval takes place, such as the world history has known. The rest is not details, far from it, but the rest is not, in a sense, logically or realistically capable of altering that course, which might be facilitated by the fact that regimes, domestically speaking, are more or less stable. Leaders stay in power for more or less time, and they tend to stay in power longer in Asia than in Europe. What you say about Central Asia, I would slightly disagree with, in the sense that the countries concerned were characterized by long-lasting leaders until the recent years, and some till the end of this USSR. Many of them were appointed or elected, whatever, in 88, 87, 89, and many of them lasted until recently. The change in Kazakhstan took place in 2022 or 1. The change in Uzbekistan took place in 2016, and Turkmenistan 2006, due to the passing away of the leader. Kyrgyzstan has had a more rich evolutions, and Tajikistan, unless I'm wrong again, has a continuity of leadership in the presidency. I think what you call, and I haven't used the word much for reasons I've said, the democratization of those countries is probably happening in the recent years. If we define it as the change of the leader in power and the change of party, whatever, than it was happening in the 1990s. So we are talking about, yes, I found the right words, we are talking about different cycles. The cycle of domestic politics is more rapid than the cycle of international politics. So what is engaged, finally and formalized perhaps in the form of an organization, is presumably lasting or going to be lasting. Because it's very difficult to start, to launch, to invent, to create, to initiate. Once it's initiated, the metaphor is that of a large container ship. Once it's going, it's hard to stop, even if it's very, very slow. Is that an answer to your question? Yes. Thank you very much. So we haven't agreed yet on the new Asia, on the new India. I'm asking for a date when the new India, if the concept is acceptable.
Bharat, we call it Bharat, New India.
Yes.
1991 economic reforms.
1991 economic reforms.
Economic reforms, that's what it is.
In the context of the end of the Cold War, or independently of that context?
Opening up Indian economic world.
Right, okay.
Opening up of India in the economic sense.
Okay, so the Indian equivalent, yes. 1991, right, okay. Yes, there was a raised hand somewhere. No?
Next. It's not a question, maybe a comment.
So what exactly happened in 1991 and why? How?
1990 India opens up its economy for the foreign direct investments and diversification of its resources and in red tapeism basically. Earlier it is a license Raj in India. You have to take permission for government. Now the economic model of India is decided by this world economic system. And India was actually suffering from this balance of payment crisis at that time. So it opened up its economy, and then
The socialist component got slowly, diluted.
And so what was the consequence in terms of partnerships?
The third,
Oh,
this part, this is
Yes,
what
yes.
this is. This is the trajectory of the diplomacy.
this is called evolving dynamics of India's economic diplomacy. 50s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2010s. Yes,
This
yes.
is where we see
Right.
90s, how it took place. And
So I should be studying this if you send it to me, or if we open a dialogue. What was the consequence of that in terms of
The consequence of that opening.
of the major partners that emerged as foreign direct investors in India? Which countries are invested certainly more massively? Is it possible to say or not?
Yes, yes, of
Yeah.
foreign procurement.
Yes.
It signed some agreements from France, and in economic terms, obviously there are various multinational companies coming here and establishing their subsidiaries in India.
So which countries? became
Western countries,
Western
America.
Greater and
countries,
deeper
United
engagement
States
with
of
the West.
America.
Because privatization, liberalization, and globalization, LPG we call it. So,
so non-Asian countries.
it was more like command economy, not exactly the. It was mixed economy always, but again, the dominant sector was the state was in the economy. But now private sectors started playing much more important role, and that started with the disinvestment in 1991 when Indian companies also started investing and Western companies also started coming. So with the Western economy.
So privatization, westernization, and opening up of the
Mainly the
economy. Yeah.
convertibility of
And
currency took
the Prime
place.
Minister
The
Convertibility of currency.
okay.
and Prime Minister was Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister was Manmohan Singh, who passed away just few weeks back. So he is the person who initiated this process of liberalization.
And so the sorry, yes, no, please.
What I see, there was a difficult time in India, a very tragic assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, former Prime Minister. And that's when another leader, Narasimha Rao, who was an important member in his cabinet previously, he took over. His advisor was his finance minister later, was Dr. Manmohan Singh, who eventually became the prime minister much later. But it was a kind of a very, very bold decision was taken how to deal with the economic crisis. Something in, I mean, it might not be the best example, but something which also prompted Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet context to come up with radical reforms. So the economic reforms that were introduced in India post 1991, it was radical in every sense. What the consequences would be, one did not know. But yes, the consequences were good, pleasant, and if today India is poised very soon, in a few years from now, to be the third largest economy in the world, the credit has to go to the 1991 opening up.
Right. So the link to my own interests is asking you whether, even if the concept is simplistic, is it a coincidence that this took place in 1991, which is also the end of the Cold War?
It had to do with the Cold War because India's trade with Soviet Union stopped. And so this Russia came under pressure.
So there was a match, so to speak, between the domestic need of something to be altered or changed and the context of one major partner.
Just imagine that before that there was just one car company in India, that was Maruti. And Fiat probably was the other car company. And after that you have hundreds of car companies coming.
Yeah.
So,
It had much to do with the disintegration of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Because India was looking for
Because there was a need to reorganize partnership away from the sole or the main partner to a number of partners. Yes.
and also with the Iraq War, after the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, what happened that we used to get a lot of remittances from that country because our workers were there. So because of Iraq War, all the people in the Gulf, they came back to India and the remittances were not coming back to India. So as a consequence, we had balance of payment crisis. So we couldn't pay for the import, mostly of the energy. So we had to send gold as a reserve to other countries, Switzerland probably. And then we had to take loan from IMF and other places. So that was the beginning of privatization, liberalization, and globalization, what we call it, LPG. And disinvestment and convertibility, partial convertibility. Full convertibility is not even today. So partial convertibility of currency started, and that's what we call it a kind of, in terms of economy, of course, but in terms of politics, some of the people say 2014, the coming of Prime Minister Modi is also taken as a kind of new India, the beginning of New India. But that's more ideological than political.
But
Right.
also a lot of bold reforms, economic reforms also he has initiated.
Right. So the comment that is forming up in my mind is to suggest that differently, of course, but we have many examples of countries going through a necessary readaptation dynamic, which happens in two steps. One step is to recreate self, or to reinforce self, or to prosperize self, so to speak, before one has a capacity to engage with others in something new, which I call original. In the case of Europe, we found ourselves in 1945 completely destroyed and completely impoverished and having to reconstruct ourselves. We did it very quickly within 5 years with the idea that we should conduct economies of scale and put together resources symbolized by the students and called cooperation, supra-sovereign authority, and a community. And the same for India, you know it by heart, but my view would be to say that India, in that sense, if you accept my vocabulary, reconstructed itself, or re-energized itself, or revitalized itself, or re-prosperized itself. Starting from 91, it took some time. Always takes time. And then India's capacity to engage with the rest of the region was built up. What is specific with India is that, as I understand, it engaged more than one region. It engaged more than just Asia. But gradually, logically, in my view, it eventually became an observer to the SCO and improved relations with, or established relations with the new Central Asia, and then became a member in 2017. All this is part of a sequence. My Weberian contrafactual question, what if not? What would have happened if, we don't know of course, but what would have happened if India had pursued that economic reform course, which I would call national, or without going through the steps of observer, then member of the SCO and other organizations? What would have happened? Could India, as one country, we take other examples, manage to remain an independent economic world actor, or find it necessary to engage with others in a regional dynamic?
I think engagement was necessary because Indian economy was roughly $270 billion in 1991. At this moment, Indian economy is roughly $3.8 trillion. So you can imagine the growth rate, you know, just from 270. So it's more than 10 times, actually, 10 times I'm saying. So in just this many years.
Yes, so the question becomes what to do, is the same question, what to do with prosperity? And what to do with prosperity?
Yes, because, you know, we have, that time poverty rate was very high. And now the poverty rate in India has come down to roughly, I'm saying 14%, according to the government figure. And yeah, there is a different way of calculating the rate of poverty. So it has also percolated down to the people. And that idea has been accepted. Earlier, it was said that, you know, this kind of economy, the privatization, etc., the trickle-down theory of economics, that was being used by the people who supported privatization. But now it has started impacting the welfare of the people. So now that logic, that only socialist model can uplift the people and the capitalist model cannot. So that has been now challenged.
Right. So my hypothesis is to suggest that what to do with macroeconomic prosperity. Of course, the redistribution issue was a difficult one, but what to do with macroeconomic prosperity? And I think what to do with macroeconomic prosperity is to engage neighbors into constructing something which will lead eventually to what Keynes called it, a multiplier factor. Which brings me to Central Asia. Often people suggest that Central Asia is slow or incapable, or was from the 90s, 2000s, in forming something among the countries concerned, something sub-regional. And my answer always is there is step one, step two. Step one is to reorganize the country, take a decision and reforms. And in their cases, they had to, each of them, completely reinvent their industrial production system. Because until 1991, they were part of the Soviet system, where the symbol is that parts were assembled somewhere, but produced parts for cars or trucks or whatever. They were produced in different places and assembled somewhere. So no country had a full capacity to produce this or that. Not to mention the financial aspects or the import, exports, and things. So some countries were specialized in one of production. So they had to reinvent the industrial system. They had to reinvent the economic system, and deal with all the aspects of sovereignty and managing countries. That took time. But the emphasis that I have, not the obsession, but the emphasis that I have, is that the fact that time passed. But in 1917, they launched something which, for the first time, was a Central Asian something, Central Asian Forum, to which I attach great importance, even though it tends to be disregarded by many people. The failed Central Asian Union that President Nazarbayev suggested in 1993 2003, I think it was, is not a failure. It's just a anticipated, excessively early or suggestion. So what happened in 2017? There was the meeting of the 5 countries in Samarkand with a very interesting diplomatic representation. All countries were present, of course, plus a number of logical observers from China, from Russia, from the EU, from the UN, and so on. But it was a bit of a coincidence that the Turkmen representation, because he had two mandates, was the Vice Prime Minister, who happened to be also the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Ministers who came were Foreign Affairs ministers, logically, plus the head of the Uzbek state as a president, as a host. But you had all 5 ministries of foreign affairs represented, whereas until then, Turkmenistan was very rarely present in collective meetings, and he happened to be at the time the first vice prime minister, I quote from memory, which gave a diplomatic weight to the meeting. And of course, what happened at that time, because the Kazakh-Uzbek rivalry for leadership was still very much present, is that the Kazakh party said the next meeting should be in Kazakhstan, because the next meeting would be the first real launching of meeting. But irrespective of that, the meeting took place the following year, 18, 19, then COVID interrupted things a little bit, and there are a number of texts which have been published, suggesting that this forum, Central Asian Forum, is the real. Okay, I can't find them. This the real launch of a Central Asian entity, whether it is a union or a market or a form of cooperation, doesn't matter. But this is the moment when those countries seem to be able to go beyond the trend for the previous years, which is basically a trend to reconstruct themselves and try to establish partnership with countries outside the region, the EU, the USA, India, and so on and so forth, and form themselves as an entity, because by that time they had reached a state of redevelopment, re-industrialization, credibilization of their stability to engage in something properly, not at the expense of their links with the other Asian countries, Russia, China, and so on, but in complement to that. And so in my vocabulary, they were coming to a moment when they could start on the centripetal construction among themselves, having anticipated in a way to the centrifugal connections. Why is this important? Because in my hypothesis, the new Asia can only be formed if countries that are part of Asia are both linked to a sub-regional construction and to a regional construction. So this is why I call Central Asia the missing link in that sense. So long as they were, so to speak, quote-unquote, disorganized as the 5 neighbors, they could not properly contribute in their interest to the multilateral regional construction. And to form a Central Asian sub-region is a way to enhance their position in the triangular format that may disfavor them in terms of Russia, China, India being the heavyweights. So this is to echo your point about the Central Asian internal evolution. So next question.
Yeah,
Yes,
one
yes.
last question. What is you? You don't have a question? Achha, he'll ask tomorrow is Monday. Because today is Friday, then you have a weekend, 2 days to rest and work on your assignment. So he'll ask you on Monday.
Right.
A long question is preparing. That's good, so good.
Yes, please, one last question or comment from somebody?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you may come forward maybe so that we all can hear you. He has a comment to make.
Thank you.
For me, what I understood from international relations is that any two countries having relations with each other or cooperation does not necessarily mean that they should have a good cooperation. What she was telling that Central Asian states have different identities. In present time, there is an issue-specific cooperation, like what we in India have cooperation. Pakistan is Indus Water Treaty. Although they have fought wars, but still the Indus Water Treaty is working. We have issues with China, border issues with China, but still the trade relations are good. So what I feel like, the cooperation between states is issue specific. This is not like we should love wholly each other. That what I have, you should have. You should agree with me 100%. It's like somewhere where we don't agree with each other, somewhere we agree. Where we agree, we cooperate. Where we don't, we don't.
Yes, I think this is a brilliant synthesis of things. In fact, cooperation is always restricted to some sectors, and there is never total peace, total harmony, total understanding, total agreement on things. Yes, which is why it is perfectly compatible to build an economic organizational cooperation despite lingering serious tensions at the border or some other form. Yes, I fully agree with you. What I didn't have time to go into, but we can keep this for next week, is when we say Central Asia, we should take a little time to define what we mean. I've said to you already, and I will say again to you, I'm struck by the fact that the Central Asian region, even in the words and mouths and perceptions of my colleagues there, is 5 countries. And I keep telling them that in modern geopolitical terms, it's not 5 countries, it's either 6 or 7 in geopolitical terms, with Afghanistan and Iran in many, many ways. And perhaps due to the Afghan dimension within the Shanghai construction, Afghanistan is more part of the new geopolitical Central Asia than Turkmenistan, which has an official policy of non-committing to the multilateral dynamics. Things in Afghanistan have changed so much and are still changing so much of the time. But definitely Iran, for reasons I substantiated, is regionalized meaning to Central Asia and then beyond Central Asia to other countries. But I fight as much as I can this idea that when we call a region, we consciously or subconsciously have in mind a list of countries. A region is not a list of countries. It is a project, a vision, both a classic course of action to secure power and a necessity to innovate and invent something else. And the moment when this takes place is when the name of the region changes its meaning. The word Europe has meant many different things from Greek mythology all the way to the present time. But whether it's the Europe with 6 member states, or 9, or 10, or 11, 12, doesn't make any difference as to the project. The project of reconstructing, surviving in terms of geopolitical terms after 1945, and reinventing itself, and eventually reaching a capacity to be a world power in macroeconomic terms, in GDP terms, not other forms of terms. And strangely enough, if I were to ask you to write an essay on Europe, you would keep on using the word Europe, almost never, unless the topic led you to, distinguish between the 6-member Europe or the 9-member Europe. It's Europe. It's the Community Europe or the European Union or the New Europe or whatever else. Similarly, the word Asia has changed its meaning. If I remember my schooling in primary school, in high school, and at university, the word Asia, and this is almost like an anecdote and a joke, I don't know if people are watching me, but this is just the word Asia has meant for us young children and high school teenagers, Asia meant Japan. In many, many ways. Why? Because Japan was the first reconstructed economy and prosperous macroeconomic partner of the West. Certainly, the word Asia meant Japan and China. When China joined in the 1990s, the International Trading Economy, Asia suddenly meant Japan, China, and Korea after the Olympic Games in Korea, which echoed the capacity of the country to be prosperous again. And gradually, Asia has come to mean Southeast Asia after ASEAN, India, of course, and Central Asia very recently, and perhaps Eurasia, Russia to some extent. So the meaning of the word, of the same name of a region, changes, which has something to do with contemporary geopolitics much more than with history or indeed geography. So geography in the sense of resources and the corridor transports, of course, is relevant, but geography in terms of cartography is not relevant to explain. It is of course necessary to characterize. And if we put on the screen, do we have a little time? Yes, just a few minutes. With Google Maps, if you call the Google Maps, please, my dear colleague, I'm exaggerating, and zoomed in on the Wuhan corridor, we can already suggest a few things that cartography tells us. But of course, beyond cartography, we need more emphasis. My contention is that the Wuhan corridor, as meaningful as it was in the 1890s, of course, to stabilize inter-imperial relations between England and Russia, was forgotten for a long, long time. The fact that there is a common border between China and Afghanistan was forgotten in many, many ways, I'm sure, for a number of reasons. First of all, the attention regarding China was focused on the east.
Not Wuhan, Wuhan corridor. Afghanistan.
Sorry, northeast of Afghanistan, the now border, the buffer corridor between Pakistan and Tajikistan. Here, there. Where's the? Do you have a pointer? No. Anyway, can you zoom in again more? There.
The top one?
Yes.
I think you're right. You want to do
Yeah, if you could.
it? For sure.
No.
ये हो रहा है. The moment I'm zooming in, no, that is not.
Can you slide down?
1 second, sir.
Yes.
नहीं वो सिस्टम में वो हो रहा है. System is not.
Sorry.
It's not going. एक second.
There. Okay. Here. Okay. So that corridor was, quote unquote, forgotten for a long, long time until it was rediscovered. In geopolitical terms, in my perception after the Cold War in the 1990s, when the borders between China and Central Asia were reactivated as relevant, were reopened, relevant. So the fact that China has a common border with Afghanistan has become extremely relevant in the recent years. Why? Because if there is something called instability in Afghanistan, China is not happy with instability at its borders, especially in that region, which is the region going west from China into the new Central Asia and the Middle East and the rest. So it's a passing corridor. On top of it, as I explained to you, the transformation of Afghanistan into a railway knot is one of the keys to the future connectivity of the continent. So cartography tells us a lot when we look at it. And if we went to the Korean Peninsula situation, we'd see that from Seoul to China, there is not only a short distance, but there is a reconstructed railway link that was reconstructed and modernized almost 30 years ago, but never much used, going through Shiryunji district. But I come back to my first point. Geography, in the sense of cartography, is never the end of the story, because we have the more meaningful phenomenon of distant neighbors becoming partners, and so distances don't matter so much, especially in a context. Let me emphasize this, and then leave you for the weekend. Let me emphasize this: that There is in the SCO Charter something that can be equated with what the Europeans called free movement of goods and capital and people, meaning open borders, totally open borders. And there is this idea of free movement within the SCO approach, with limitations. I understand there are limitations in many situations, but the fact that we've gone just in 30 years from absolutely closed borders, with military build-up on either side, and fears of intervention by some, to a moment where borders are stabilized, demilitarized, and open as facilitators of cross-border investments and trade is a huge leap in history. And when you read the Shanghai Five, the article on the success of the Shanghai Five, you will notice that the author reminds us that the key military or demilitarization agreements were signed before 2001. They were signed in the 5-year gap of the Shanghai Five. So to demilitarize, let me just emphasize this again, to demilitarize borders among those countries was a total invention or rupture from the past. Let us sometimes take facts for what they mean, and sometimes facts are very meaningful. Thank you.
So we are done for today. Thank you so much, Professor.
No, no.
I'm so sorry. I was not able to.
No.